Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to Voting Rights and Reproductive Freedom. This is a discussion of how these two vital issues are interrelated and how you can take action locally to address them and to set yourself out on the path to creating meaningful change right here in Rhode Island. My name's Tammy Brown. I'm on the board of directors for the Women Project Education Fund, and we're a statewide organization based right here in Rhode Island. We're a grassroots organization dedicated to building a strong movement that harnesses the power of art, activism, and advocacy to dismantle systems of oppression and uplift voices of the people in our communities. And as we begin this conversation, we must acknowledge that we do this work for justice within the context of great injustice throughout history. We are speaking to you today from the stolen lands of the Narragansett people, in a state whose economy was built on and depended on the forced labor of enslaved Africans and Native people. And if you don't know whose land you currently reside on, go ahead and visit native-land.ca to find out, because we have to acknowledge this history. We have to acknowledge the current presence of Native people, and we'll have to do more than simply acknowledge the atrocities from the past and the present. We have to work to uplift these voices today. Also, it is February 2nd. It's the beginning of Black History Month. And so I also want to acknowledge what an honor it is to be talking about this particular issue of voting rights at the beginning of Black History Month. We are standing on the shoulders of those who fought so hard in the civil rights era to be pioneers for voting rights. And we know that the quest for equal access to the polls was an effort championed by so many Black activists before us. It's humbling for me personally to be able to say that in some small way, we're continuing their efforts today in our state, today and every day. So I am honored to help kick off this event today as advocates at the state and federal level are pushing to improve access to the ballot. We know that the ability to have a say in our government has a huge impact on all the issues that we care about. If you care about abortion rights, if you care about climate change, if you care about healthcare, all of these issues start with voting, really. So now I am pleased to hand it over to my fellow Woman Project board member and an incredible advocate and activist on so many important issues. Janie Segui Rodriguez is here to talk a little bit more about the connections between voting rights and the work that so many of us are involved in around reproductive freedom and justice. So Janie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tammy, and happy to be here with all of you today. So the people most impacted by the relentless attacks and restrictions on voting rights are the very same people most affected by anti-abortion laws and the barriers to reproductive health care. People of color, low-income individuals, the LGBTQ community, young people, and immigrants. Voter suppression and the lack of abortion access and bodily autonomy intertwine to undermine the dignity, decisions, and power of a large portion of the population. And these issues and needs are always linked. The ability to plan our families and futures, achieve reproductive justice, and to fully govern our own lives and bodies is impacted by the right to vote and whether or not we have a say in who writes the laws and how those laws either empower and support our communities or maintain a status quo that is stacked against us. The barriers that have been created to reproductive rights and healthcare are about limiting who gets to make their own decisions, just as the limits on voting are all about control and power hoarding. Simply put, this is oppression and it's intended to keep people down and restrict access. This is intentional. Just as the limits on abortion, additional barriers and policies taking away coverage to make care unaffordable are intended to do just that, take care away. Voting restrictions are intended to target the same Black and Brown communities that turned out in record numbers throughout the United States, especially in the South and Midwest. Anti-abortion legislators in Georgia, for example, passed a measure to strip away Georgia's Secretary of State election oversight in favor of increased conservative legislative oversight. It also creates new barriers to voting by adding new voter ID requirements for absentee ballots, permanently reduces access to ballot drop boxes, and criminalizes the practice of line warming, in which volunteers hand out food and water to voters standing in long lines, among others. These actions are designed to disproportionately impact and suppress the vote of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That means people who care about contraceptive access, abortion rights, and sex education have to also be involved in efforts to ensure equitable access to the vote. We have to make sure that our communities are heard and that we have a say in who represents us, right? Because they're representing us. Voting rights are more important than ever, with so many important issues that we care about on the line. We must not only fight back on limits, but also fight for proactive change. And I'm going to go ahead and kick this back over to Tammy.
Thank you so much, Janie. So as Janie alluded to, if you want to advance the issues that you care about, really voting is the place to start. We at the Women Project are working on the Equality and Abortion Coverage Act, but that's not the only bill that we are supporting this year's legislative session. There's also the Let RI Vote Act. And so to that end, I am very pleased to welcome and introduce two folks who are working hard on the campaign to pass that bill. We have Cristin Langworthy, who's an organizer with the Let RI Vote campaign, and Marcella Betancur, who is the spokesperson for the campaign and also the executive director of the Latino Policy Institute. So welcome to you both. Thank you both for coming. And we'll just jump right in. I have some questions for you about the Let RI Vote Act. Cristin, can you talk a little bit about the origins of the Let RI Vote Act and specifically how changes to the voting process during the pandemic influenced the creation of this bill?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tammy. Hello, everyone. I'm Cristin Langworthy. My pronouns are she, her. I'm happy to be with you all today. As Tammy asked, to kind of dive into the history of the Voter Access Coalition, in which the Women Project is a member of over 30 organizations that have joined together to support voter access in our state. During the pandemic, it was really difficult for us to ensure that people had access to the ballot. The way that we voted had to change, just like so much about our lives in general. And there was a push to turn to mail ballots and expand opportunities to use early in-person voting for the first time. But a lot of those changes that we made were temporary. They were emergency protocols that were put in place, and they weren't permanent. And so those provisions have expired. Those protections for voter access have expired. And the organizations that have all joined together in coalition really saw the need to make those provisions permanent, not just because of the pandemic, but because it was such a benefit to so many voters, so many people who, typically don't have ease of access to the ballot because they're working busy lives, they're raising families, they're balancing all sorts of things. And the options that we had during the pandemic gave people flexibility in a way that they just didn't have before. And so we felt there was a strong need to make these permanent options for folks in every election. And we brought these issues to our state legislators, and we have these two amazing champions, Senator Dawn Hoyer and Representative Catherine Kazarian in the House, who have introduced the Let RI Vote Act. And that is a bill that will codify those provisions that enable people to access the ballot during the pandemic, particularly around mail ballots and early voting, but also to create options like the drop boxes and a multilingual information hotline for voters to turn to as a resource. So those are the things that we're working on, making real options in every election for voters all across our state.
Thank you so much, Cristin. And you started to talk a little bit about the specifics of what the Let RI Vote Act will do. Marcella, I wonder if you could go into a little bit more detail and talk about some of those provisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Cristin also mentioned a little bit about the different ways in which in 2020, a lot of voters in Rhode Island made their vote count, right? And so we also received a little bit of polling data around this, and we found that about 38% of voters in our state voted on election day. However, 29% of them voted on early in person, and 33% of them voted by mail. And why does that matter? Because as Cristin mentioned, our Rhode Island voters demonstrated that they want and need the different options and access for voting in a year that was the beginning of an ongoing pandemic. However, for many Rhode Islanders, that some of these safety issues are still the case. So with that, I just wanted to kind of highlight specifically mail voting, for example. So currently, if you are going to vote by mail, you actually have to apply for it. You have to apply for it, and you have to apply for it every time. So one of the provisions of this legislation would be that you can apply for it online, right? Which is a really important thing. We have our website is really easy to be able to access it. And one of the other issues is that technically before 2020, you needed kind of a reasoning or an excuse to not only vote by mail, but also emergency voting. And so part of the legislation will permit a voter to just apply and cast their ballot without needing that excuse, which is really important. Early voting, as we mentioned, was one of the other provisions of this legislation, and that means that for a certain amount of days before the actual election day, either primary or general election, voters are able to go and cast their ballot. And that was really important. That, for example, for my parents, that was a really important, and that's how they voted. Not only was it was my mom's first time voting in 2020 after becoming a U.S. citizen. It's very exciting, but also it was safer. They did not have to stand in line for hours or even just like longer than 20 minutes. My parents are in their 60s and they have chronic conditions, so having that access was very, very helpful. One of the other things that I think it's really exciting that Cristin mentioned was a hotline for voters. And so what that is, in 2020, 211, which is part of United Way, kind of took on that role a little bit. And again, all of this was done through emergency powers. But this legislation would create that hotline, and this hotline would provide voters with accurate information that is not biased, and it's just simple information: where to vote, what do they need to know about their ballot, things that, and more importantly, it will be a multilingual hotline. Our state speaks dozens of languages, if not more, and ensuring that our voters feel comfortable talking to someone in whatever language that is other than English is really, really important. So those are just a few of the things, but we can happy to dig in a little more in one of them.
And I think there's the witness requirement for.
Yes.
Cristin, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the most important provisions of the bill. In Rhode Island law currently, if you want to vote by mail, you have to have 2 witnesses or a notary sign your mail ballot. That was a provision that was waived by an emergency order during the pandemic, but is now back in place. That is no longer a protection that voters have. And so it is a burden on voters to have to go find somebody to either notarize, and that process may not be very accessible to people. Not everyone knows what a notary is or how they work. It makes people more vulnerable if they have to bring someone else into their voting process to have 2 witnesses. Not everybody lives with someone else that can provide a witness signature for them. And really, accessing your mail ballot should just be as easy as voting in person. It should be an option that's equally accessible to others, or to everyone, I should say. And it's just not an unnecessary requirement. Only a tiny handful of states even have these kinds of requirements in the first place. And it's not good company to keep, like Alabama and North Carolina. So we found that this wasn't a necessary thing to have in order to ensure election security, because we use signature matching in Rhode Island to confirm a voter's identity. And with that information from the Board of Elections, we feel really confident that permanently removing the witness notary requirement will ease access to using mail ballots for people who are eligible voters and make it an option that's really equal to the other forms of voting, like early voting, the 20 days before election day, or even casting your ballot on election day. No matter what you choose, it should really be about what works best for you, because our vote is our voice. It's the way that we shape the issues that matter most to us, the way we choose our representation and hold power accountable. So, everyone who's an eligible voter should be able to choose how to cast their ballot in a way that works for them. And this requirement being removed would really enhance people's ability to access mail ballots without changing anything about how we do election security.
Yeah, and given the really extensive use of mail ballots in the 2020 election, I wonder if one of you wants to talk about how what does the greater usage of mail ballots in 2020 tell us about the need for expanded usage of mail ballots in every election going forward? Maybe Marcella, do you want to talk about that a
Sure.
little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And Cristin can add more. So I think what it was beautifully surprising, I guess, in my opinion, to see that, because for many voters in our state and nationwide, we knew that mail ballots were a thing, but for years, at least for myself, I'll speak for myself, I always thought of mail ballots as something that very specific few people could do. However, I remember a specific occasion where I wasn't able to vote in a primary election because I was traveling due to an emergency. And so I was out of the country at that time. And I pride myself in being a super voter and voting on primary elections. And so imagine, and that's just one example. There are many and thousands of Rhode Islanders and that have big concerns and have issues when it comes to voting, and having access to something like this, as Cristin mentioned, it should just be just as easy as voting in person. Our technology has changed, our securities has changed. That's one issue that sometimes people bring up, which is security. Nevertheless, I think it's really important to underscore some of what Cristin mentioned of our signature matching, and understanding that this is a method of voting that has been around. Simply just increasing it and providing access is incredibly important to ensuring that every voter has their voice heard.
Marcella is absolutely right, because this is something that isn't new. States across the country use mail ballots to various degrees. Some even send mail ballots out as an automatic thing. There are states, both Democrat-led and Republican-led, that are all mail ballot states. They still have locations for people to vote in person that want to, but the default for those states is all mail ballots. We're not going that far. We're really just making the push for people to have choices, and they get to choose what works best for them. And having people have to have a special circumstance or an excuse to vote by mail makes it seem, like Marcella just mentioned, like it's for just special categories of people, and not something that's just a normal part of being a participant. One thing that I would like to point out is only 35% of people who used a mail ballot in the 2020 election in Rhode Island had ever used one before. But during 2020, over 60% of people cast their ballot before election day. That's a huge change in how we engage in our democracy. The thing that most tickled my heart, I should say, is so many parents and families that I talked to during the election had the opportunity, because they had requested a mail ballot, to sit down and be really thoughtful about their choices. And they were working with their kids. They were giving them the opportunity not only to see them as a visible voter, someone who cares about their community and is modeling what engaging in participatory democracy looks like, but it inspires them. We know from a lot of studies that kids who see their community members, their family members being voters are much more likely to be voters themselves when they reach the age of eligibility. If we want a strong democracy, if we want people to increase their participation, we have to recognize that making it easier for families to include their children in the process of voting is going to make future voters. And I think that's just a really beautiful thing in general, but it's really important that we recognize we don't have really high participation rates, especially among our primary elections, which are the most important in our state. So having that opportunity is something that really just comes with more options, more flexibility. And those are the kinds of things we see come out of the pandemic. It's lessons learned that we can apply to the future and enhance and strengthen our community and our democracy for years to come.
Yeah, Janie, I saw you really like agreeing with a lot of what Cristin was saying. I wonder if you want to add a little bit about how expanded access to voting, expanded access to the ballot can lead to expanded participation in government and in policy change.
I mean, just in general, I mean, expanding access will always create more participation. It also reminded me of, obviously we're talking about parents, so I was a little excited, but it reminded me of my first time of voting at the ballot. Like I went with my mom and I went into like the booth, and this was obviously like, I don't know what, 15 years ago or whatever, 17 years ago. And this was in Connecticut. So at the time you could hit like the lever and they would like all go down on like whatever side. But like I was able to go into the voting box with her like right before I was supposed to vote, so I could see what the process was like, and it's like less intimidating. But even just the thought of that, like people having access to it at home, I didn't even think about it in that way of like sharing it or having that experience with their children, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I would add too is that Marcella had kind of brought this to our attention. There are so many families that speak more than one language in their household. And from my work in voter education and outreach, I heard a lot of folks who were supporting an elder in their household whose primary or preferred language is not English. And often, our election materials aren't translated in all languages. And so people who have the right to vote, but are maybe not able to access their ballot, are able to get support from other family members in the household in a way that I think is really important to recognize in our diverse state that is a strength and an asset to us.
Yeah, and it's like the idea that you can kind of have your ballot, you can be at home, you can be a little bit more deliberative about it, you can do research, you can talk things over with friends and family, it just makes the whole process a little bit more accessible, but also like easy to engage in. And I think sometimes a barrier to participation is that people don't understand all of the offices that are being run for. They don't understand all of the issues that are on the ballot, but there's just a sense that you can kind of get it ahead of time, look it through, go on the internet, like look up the offices. It makes for a much more, I think, informed process too, is what it seems to me. And for those folks who are just joining us, we're talking about the Let RI Vote Act, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is Senate Bill 2007 or House Bill H7100. This is a bill that the Women Project is supporting. We are part of the Let RI Vote Coalition, and so we're letting you know a little bit more about this law and about how it can affect people's everyday lives. So I wonder if we can talk a little bit about the federal efforts. We've been hearing a lot in the news about the federal, like the legislative process in Congress and how those bills seem to have stalled. And I think it can be a little disappointing to see that no action is being taken to really expand the right to vote on a national level. But we're making strides here potentially, and I wonder if either Cristin or Marcella want to talk about how the national efforts relate to what we're doing here in Rhode Island.
Sure, I'll start us off. I think it's really important that we kind of see how it's required of us as active participants in our democracy to take action in order to have the kind of issues and priorities that we want to see happen. And when we look at Washington, when we look at Congress, and we see the federal legislation addressing voting rights and voting access just going nowhere, it's a really chilling kind of deadlock in the Senate. And those two pieces of legislation, the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act, these two pieces of legislation would address things on the federal level. But because there's no action on those bills, we really can't wait, and we cannot afford to have voting rights unprotected on a state by state level. We see voting rights under attack in states all across the country. But Rhode Island has this really incredible opportunity to champion voting rights and increase access to the ballot, and do that proactively. We're not sitting here looking at voter suppression in an active way in Rhode Island. We're looking at opportunities to take, like I said, those lessons learned and put them into action about what voters say they need and want, and were really, really popular in the last few cycles. What worked, right? We tested this in 4 statewide elections and it worked. So I think about 2019 and the Women Project and many other organizations feeling the same kind of pressure during the federal debate, the national debate around abortion access, and how it was just so necessary to move to codify Roe v. Wade at the state level. And that same parallel exists here, right? Voting rights needs to be something that each of us looks at as a priority for us on the state level. And we're making every attempt to ensure that people have access to the ballot and the ability, the opportunity to cast their vote. It's not just, do you have the right to vote? It's, do you have the ability and opportunity to cast your ballot? And those things are something we just cannot afford to wait on Washington. We need our state leaders to take action. And that's what gives me such excitement and hope, because we do have strong champions that are listening to the community and hearing about their experience in the last year and a half, and taking steps to actually implement those changes.
And it's just a reminder of how important it is to participate locally in policy and elections, because, like you say, we can't necessarily wait for federal action, and so much attention is given to the federal action and to like the national races. And really, it's in Rhode Island, we have such an opportunity. We're in a small state. It's a great opportunity to really affect change right here at home, and so we have a great opportunity here to expand access to both abortion rights and to voting rights. It's really, really powerful. Our vote is very, very powerful on a state and local level if we utilize it. So I wonder, Marcella, if you could talk a little bit about the Let RI Vote Coalition, and like what types of groups have been involved in that, what activities y'all have been doing.
Absolutely, that's my favorite. We have we've gathered a really good group of orgs and friends to kind of help with this campaign. So we have over 30 orgs that have been part of this campaign, right, Cristin? Yes, over 30. And they range from organizations that have been leading voting access and good government work and policy for a long time, such as Common Cause, the ACLU, the League of Women Voters, and newer organizations to this work, right? So for example, this is Latino Policy Institute's first time in work like this, which is incredibly important to the mission and work that we do. We have the Women's Project, as you said. We have the NAACP. We have a few unions that have joined us, which is incredible. The work that labor unions do around our state, and ensuring that it kind of underlines how impactful it is to make sure that every Rhode Island voter has access to their ballot. Around their work schedule and other things is really important. We have organizations that represent communities with different disabilities, which is an incredibly important lens to hold when it comes to legislation like this. And so we are incredibly proud of the group that is here. And again, it's 30 orgs, and you can find them in our website, which is at letrivote.org. but every single one has been able to commit to the work that we've been doing. We meet monthly. A couple of weeks ago, it is a couple of weeks ago, time is a construct. A couple of weeks ago, we actually had our launch at the State House, and while it had to be a little bit hybrid because of the ongoing pandemic, we were able to have some of our partners there, like I said, so the NAACP, AFL-CIO, the Women's Fund of Rhode Island, and our legislative sponsors. So it was really beautiful to kind of be there together and then online together. Last year, we were able to do a press conference together. And then tomorrow, we actually have a really cool event where we're inviting our partners, as well as anybody else who's watching and is interested in learning how to testify and kind of prepare testimony. We are hoping that in the next few weeks, we'll be able to have, this legislation be heard. And so there are a lot of organizations, especially small grassroots orgs, that are not always kind of comfortable or knowledgeable of how to do this. And the amazing Cristin Langworthy, as well as with other teammates of ours, will be there walking people through this. So, and that's just one of the many things that we're hoping to do. And yeah, Cristin, anything else to add about our awesome group of friends?
I'm so proud of the fact that we have such a broad cross-section of partners in this work. It just speaks to how universal this issue is. Whatever issue you're working on, whatever most speaks to your heart and your needs in a community, at the foundation, it's access to the vote, right? So I've worked a little bit in the housing sector, for example, and affordable housing is a crisis issue in our state. That is something that voter access is so intrinsically linked to housing status and the ability to cast your ballot and make sure that your voice is heard in choosing representation and shaping policy around something that's so, so important. And there are many organizations with us in this fight that are speaking to different issues, right? So no matter what perspective you're coming from or what community that you're representing, it is this universal thing. It's nonpartisan and it's not issue specific. It's the heart of everything that it takes to be a part of a democracy. One of the things that I really want to call attention to is the fact that you have people standing side by side in this coalition that aren't always on the same side of every issue. And so it really does give us confidence that this is the kind of thing that Rhode Islanders need, no matter what status they're in, no matter where they are at their life and what issues are most important to them. So I think about our speakers at our launch last week. I know it feels like ages ago, but it was just last week that we kicked off this campaign in Pat Crowley from the AFL-CIO just gave a rousing speech that I really, really spoke to my heart, and Jim Vincent from the NAACP as well got real fired up for voter access. And I just got goosebumps, right? Like it is something that, organizations that have been in this movement for a really long time, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement, this is a historical moment for Rhode Island to, as you said, Tammy, take the legacy, that those shoulders of giants that we stand on, and carry the torch forward. That's our responsibility right now, is to carry the torch forward and make sure that our democracy is that much more accessible to people in our community. So I'm really proud of our coalition. And if you're not able to join us tomorrow night, Thursday at 6 p.m. for our voter testimony prep party, you can also go to letRIvote.org and use our digital letter tool to send a message to your state senator and your state representative, asking them to prioritize this bill. We really want to see it move forward fairly quickly so that we can implement these changes in time for what is one of the most exciting non-presidential year elections in Rhode Island. It is, we have a state primary coming up in September, and we have, the general election in November, but we need time to make sure that these changes are put in place. And I do want to highlight one thing and send it back to Marcella for a moment about same-day voter registration. This is something that we're also working on. Marcella, do you want to tell us a little bit about the same-day reg bill?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for bringing it up. So same day registration is another piece of legislation that we are, as a campaign, we're very supportive of. So this specific resolution, so it's a resolution, and what would happen if it passes, when it passes, is that it would actually have a question in our ballots in November this year, which would include a change to the Constitution. So right now, it's being the sponsors of this legislation. In the House, we have Representative Nathan Villa, and in the Senate, we have Senator Alana DiMario. And we're hoping that what this would do is it would ensure that, as kind of the word it says, we would be able to register for that same day. So right now, during presidential elections, you don't have, if you're not registered to vote that day, you can, you have to fill an application and vote for president, only for president that day. Nevertheless, we would be joining several of our other partners in New England that right now have same day registration, not only in New England, but now there's other 22 states and DC that have same day voter registration. This is really, really important. I think as a provision, when we talk about access and we talk about options, this is something important. I think this can be a really impactful legislation, or not just legislation, an important piece of voting access for young people, especially. Imagine people who have birthdays around, a specific time, and you just make, right now, if you make just the cutoff of 30 days before you register before an election, that's hard, right? Nevertheless, with same day voter registration, that won't be the same issue. So this is something that we're really excited and hopeful that to see pass at the General Assembly this year. And hopefully we can change the Constitution thanks to this.
What I love about this resolution most is that it puts power in the hands of the voters. It is asking Rhode Islanders to allow the General Assembly to change the voter registration deadline. And as Marcella said, this is something that benefits people who have historically been either marginalized or overlooked in elections, and especially our young voters and first-time voters. Not everybody is a elections fanatic like some of us. I will self-identify. And so, keeping on track of all these, quite frankly, arbitrary deadlines. So much of our technology has modernized the way we administer elections, and we know with confidence that this is something we can do. And Marcella already brought attention, 22 states, the District of Columbia, and 4 of our neighbors are already doing this. So when we ask voters this question, we really hope that they'll say yes. But before we can get them that question on their ballot, the General Assembly needs to pass the resolution to put it there. That's how it works in Rhode Island. We need that General Assembly resolution to put the question before the voters, and then they get to make the decision themselves about what comes next.
And along those lines, I was going to ask, what's the status of both the resolution and the Let RI Vote Act right now in the General Assembly, and what can folks do to help it along?
Yes, and Cristin, I don't know if you just want to take that. Go ahead.
So thank you, Tammy. The 2 bills that we're talking about, the Let RI Vote Act and the same day registration resolution, we expect to see those bills come up for hearings in committee very soon. We want to encourage people to, as I mentioned before, go to letrivote.org and use our digital letter tool to reach out to their senators and their representatives and encourage them to not only support this if they're a member of the Senate Judiciary or House State Government and Elections Committee, but also to support it when it comes to the floor. That is really important. And the best way you can do that is sharing your experience, your personal experience as a voter, how these kinds of provisions will help you. And if you don't know enough, or you don't feel like you know enough about what's in the bill, on our website, there are one-pagers that describe what are in the different bills. So you can take a look for yourself and see, what's relevant to you. Maybe you really love the idea of having a drop box because it's more convenient and you want to see that put on the state law. Maybe getting your online application for your mail ballot is the thing for you. Maybe you missed getting your application for your mail ballot in because of that. And that would be a change that would benefit you. Really speaking to your personal experience, and expressing how important it is to you to improve access and opportunity to vote in our state is the real way to impress upon our decision makers how they can help their voters, their constituents, be participants in every election. And that is the best way to help. If you are a member of one of our partner organizations and you want to submit testimony, that's another way you can help. The testimony prep party is tomorrow night, but you can also reach out to us at letrivote@gmail.com and get in touch with us so that we can help support you in submitting a letter to the committee, so that that's something that your point of view is expressed as well. We want to make sure that everybody has that opportunity, but we really appreciate the thousands of people who have already taken action with us already. This just proves, once again, these are changes that Rhode Islanders really want and need, and that is something that we want to encourage people to share as well with their friends, their community members, so that it's not just you taking the action, it's building power together for a stronger state. Because I think as more people vote, we are a better and stronger state.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that is just about it for this conversation. Thank you so much. Is there anything else? Is there anything I didn't ask you? Anything else you want to talk about the bill before we go?
No, I don't think so. Thank you all of you for having us. This is very exciting. So thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you for having us. We are so proud to partner with the Women Project and to talk about how voting is at the heart of all the issues that we care about. So thank you for having us for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. And for reference, you can go to letrivote.org for more information about the bill, for more information about the upcoming events. You can join their testimony writing event tomorrow night as well, and stay involved. And hopefully we can see this legislation come to pass this session. So thank you all for tuning in, and stay connected with the Women Project for more information about things you can do to help advance policy right here in Rhode Island. Thank you. Bye, everyone.